Good evening and welcome to Cupertino Insight. Tonight we'll have highlights of the Oktoberfest celebration and we'll take a look at Cupertino Tiny Tots learning gymnastic skills. Also, in advance of a City Council public hearing to consider a no smoking ordinance, we will have two people here to debate that issue. But first, my guests are here to discuss Measure A, which will be on the November ballot. This measure proposes to increase the sales tax in this county by ½ cent, with the funds going to improve transportation. If passed, the money would be used to complete Highway 85, improve 101, and bring 237 up to a freeway status. Supervisor Tom Legan is here in support of the measure, and City Councilwoman of Palo Alto, Fletcher, is here to express a different opinion. Tom, it's my understanding that you were involved in the development of the measure. What makes you feel that this particular measure will solve our transportation problems?
Okay, well, first, to be concise, it is a ½ cent sales tax limited to a 10-year period. It automatically terminates in 10 years and specifically dedicated to improving those three roadways as you described. The reason I feel it is so essential is that in the time I've been on the Board of Supervisors, I've researched all the funding possibilities, and I'm sorry to report that statewide there is an unfunded road need alone of $19 billion, a total need of $33 billion, so the state is, of course, funding a significant portion, but if we are to wait for the completion of these roads per the current state funding sources, it looks like about a 40-year period.
That's incredible.
I know I don't want to be short-sighted, but I start to lose interest in the improvement if they're not going to happen for 40 years. And so based on that and based on the input of both a tremendous number of private citizens, the people who sit there in traffic for 45 minutes to an hour one way each day to travel some 14 to 17 miles to work, the average commute distance and average commute time, to look for a solution. And then on the other hand, the businesses are saying, unless we see some improvement, we're going to have to move our facilities and plan our continued economic growth elsewhere. And long-term wise, that portends poorly for our county. So based on that, we were able to get Senator Al Alquist together with Assemblyman John Vasconcellos and Ernie Conyu to co-sponsor an enabling piece of legislation which allowed the County Board of Supervisors to put on the November ballot for a vote of the people the measure for the ½ cent for 10 years to fund the three roads. Now, when you look at what these three roads basically will be servicing, it will be the past growth that has occurred. So much of our valley has been developed predicated upon the completion of these roadways, and it's absolutely essential that we put them in place to serve the pent-up demand that's already there.
Excuse me
Sure.
a minute. I have read the ballot measure, and it does not specifically state those three freeways in it. Now, the literature that has come out of the measure does specifically state those three freeways. My question is, what accountability is there to make sure that the funds go for those three highways?
Okay, both in the state enabling law, the Senate Bill 2117, which enabled us to put the ballot measure, and also in the county ordinance, those three roadways are specifically designated so that there was certainly an oversight in the drafting of the law, and once it became law, we couldn't change it, but the oversight of not listing those three roads directly in the ballot language, but it is stated both in the full law text itself and in the county ordinance that would be implementing that law. So
safeguards are there.
Definitely.
Yes,
definitely.
I was a little curious about that.
Yeah, and it's very important because I think people have to realize that to the extent that they recognize the specific nature of the tax, the idea that it will go to three specific roadways and that it will terminate in 10 years is absolutely essential, because what the electorate is saying is, hey, if I see a specific improvement, I'll consider paying for that, but don't just ask me to give you my money and trust me.
But let me
let me add one thing before we go on is,
I think the important focus here is that we do have in place some pretty substantial transit funding, and we're working very hard on that. We have of course, the bus system, which carries 125,000 riders a day, and we're working to make that ever better and serve more and more people. We have right now 19% of our commuters ride share, and we're reinforcing that with the carrot, so to speak, and the so-called commute lanes, and they're being very well accepted. And then during all other hours, those are open to general public and a benefit to all of us. Then the idea of continued transit improvements, the Guadalupe Corridor project, which is underway now, which will bring light rail to our valley. And then the study, which we have underway, about the potential of extending BART from the Fremont corridor. So what we need here in Santa Clara County is a total transportation system. And we do have some funding mechanisms for the transit. We need to complete these roads, which so much of our valley was developed, predicated upon their being completed. And then hopefully by the year 2000, have in place that total transportation system that our valley needs.
Ellen,
Sure.
I know that Palo Alto City Council does not endorse the measure. Could you please tell us some of the reasons for that?
Some of the reasons were that it's not going to solve this transportation problem, as Tom said, but let me get into the details of that in a minute. Because of the runaway development which is occurring, the highways that are planned can't possibly deal with the problem. But to go back a little bit to what you were discussing earlier about the sales tax language on the ballot, one problem I have is that it's a bias statement being called a Commuter Relief Act because it's not going to relieve the traffic problems and in the long term. And even for the 10-year life of the tax, it won't do that. But more than that, it's not called a sales tax. It's called a transaction and use tax. And that leaves the impression that it's a user tax, which I wouldn't have a problem with. Now, Tom mentioned the studies that are underway. In the 85 corridor, for instance, there's a study underway which, mandated by law, must determine the best use of that transportation corridor. And here, if we approve the sales tax, we're jumping the gun. We're saying the outcome of this study should say we need a freeway. In the 101 corridor on the peninsula, there is a mass transit study occurring, which will determine what the best system is there, and they're looking at the various alternatives, upgrading the SP to a real rapid transit service, or replacing the present line with light rail, or even extending BART. And a similar study is occurring in the Fremont corridor. And one of the alternatives also is to add lanes for purely bus service, express bus service, which would really be also a mass transit system. The problem is that the money which is now going into the bus system is not solving the problem, and it can't. It's a very inefficient system. It carries such a low number of people compared to what's needed. And freeway lanes at the most can carry 1,800 cars or vehicles per hour. Compare that with the light rail line, which is planned for the Guadalupe. In excess of 11,000 passengers can be carried in one direction in an hour. And BART is twice that, 22,000 plus passengers per hour in one direction. Now, that seems to be our answer, that freeway lanes will be filled beyond capacity long before this 10-year period of the tax runs out. And in the meantime, when the studies are completed, and it's not going to be far along, the studies are almost completed, they'll be finished within a few months, and an alternative, a real traffic solution, a long-term traffic solution will be proposed, then we've already locked into one of the funding mechanisms that might be available, which is the half-cent sales tax. And the half-cent sales tax is really going to be gone down the drain, because after 10 years we'll have raised over $1 billion and spent it on a system which is already which will be already overloaded before the funds are all expended. So I have a lot of problems with that measure. Now, we know that transit takes a long time to implement, and in the meantime, if the county manufacturing group, for instance, which is behind this measure, were to expend their energies instead on working with employers to charge employees for the parking space, just the full cost which the employer is now providing free to the employee, then we could cut down immediately on the congestion, could cut it in half, and I have some studies which show that that can easily be done. And then the employee, in turn, could ask the employer to give the employee a transportation allowance on top of his salary, which is the equivalent to the cost of the parking space. Then the employee can determine how best to commute to work. What is the most efficient way to get to work? And it's been shown when that happens that the single auto driver just drops driving alone. And I have some figures here if you're interested. In Los Angeles, which is really a poor example which we're trying to emulate if we go this route, where an employer stopped paying solo drivers who use their cars to get to work, and solo driving fell from 82% to 8%, and carpooling rose from 17 to 58%, just by not subsidizing that parking space anymore.
I want to thank both of you very much for being here today with us. The City Council of the City of Cupertino has unanimously supported Measure A. But regardless of what position you take, just remember to please get out and vote in November. Okay. Parks and Recreation fall programs are well underway for both adults and children. Last week, we went to the Tiny Tots Gymnastics program. Watch now as these children learn to walk the balance beam, perform on tumbling exercises, and learn techniques on the parallel bars. Looks like future Olympic material there. Many cities in the area have adopted some kind of smoking regulations, either a formal ordinance or a voluntary type program. Last August, Marty Miller, a citizen of Cupertino, requested that the City Council consider a formal no smoking ordinance. It looks like a public hearing for such an ordinance will be scheduled the middle of November. Here with me today is Marty Miller to talk about his ideas for an ordinance. Here he is, Marty. Marty, why do you think such an ordinance would be necessary?
Well, my main concern is with controlling smoking in the workplace. There are varying ordinances in effect today in California and other states that deal with public places, restaurants, public buildings, and so forth. And I think that's important too, but my main concern is with the workplace. And the primary reason for that is if you're in a public building and somebody is smoking and it is irritating or a problem to you, you can get up and leave. But in your workplace, where you go and you make your money and you spend a good portion of your life, it is not quite that easy. And so my main concern is addressing that issue in the workplace. And given that there are ordinances in 28 California communities today and ordinances in 8 states in addition to California, it appears that many people have felt that this is a concern and have addressed that concern with an ordinance.
Marty, I know the manufacturers group feels that a voluntary program would be better because the ordinance would basically be unenforceable. What do you think of the possibility of an effective voluntary program?
Well, the evidence to date is that voluntary programs do not work. The American Lung Association has been working extremely hard over the past 3 years to get a voluntary program going in the San Jose area, and they have failed miserably. In fact, at one point, they sent out invitations, 200 invitations or thereabouts, to companies in the San Jose area to attend a dinner to talk about voluntary programs, and only 6 companies responded.
I see. I assume you also work in Cupertino as well as reside here.
Yes, I do.
All right. Would it be correct that perhaps you have problems at where you work with this type of thing, or did you just feel that everybody in general has that problem?
I don't have problems in particular at work, but I do know of people that do have problems, primarily with other firms in the area. And it's just a general concern to me, and I've been aware of the move in communities throughout the area to move towards a non-smoking ordinance, in particular San Francisco, Palo Alto, Mountain View, and it just seems like a reasonable thing to do, and I think that we should have that kind of ordinance in Cupertino.
Now, I know we presently have an ordinance on the books that I believe prohibits smoking in elevators, and restaurants of a certain size have to have a certain percentage of area for non-smokers. And I notice our council chamber, half is for smokers and half is for non-smokers. What other kinds of things would you like to regulate?
Well, as I mentioned at the start, my main concern is regulating smoking in the workplace. And I'm not suggesting that we get rid of it. What I'm suggesting is that perhaps we designate specific areas that are for smoking, so that if a smoker wants to exercise his right of smoking, he can go to that area and go smoke. And he does not have to impose that problem on his fellow workers who do not smoke, who have difficulty with cigarette smoke in the workplace.
What about private offices? How about smoking in private offices where someone would be alone and could shut the door or even leave the door open?
Well, I have no problem with smoking in a private office. My main concern is when you're smoking in an area where other people are involved who will be affected by that smoke adversely.
Okay. Do you think I take it then from your previous suggestions that you don't feel a voluntary program will work?
Well, the voluntary programs have not worked in this area. The American Lung Association has tried very hard on voluntary programs and has not been successful. And on the other hand, if we look at the evidence of cities who have enacted smoking programs, such as San Francisco, Palo Alto, and Mountain View, the evidence has been very favorable that it works, that companies enact it fairly easily, and the number of complaints are relatively small, so that it's not really a burden on the cities involved. In particular, I don't remember the exact numbers, but the number of complaints in San Francisco itself are relatively small. The entire state of Minnesota has enacted a program, and the number of complaints per year from the state of Minnesota is on the order of 137, which is relatively small.
Okay. I want to thank you very much for being here today, Marty, and I'm sure you'll be present when the City Council has that public hearing.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Okay. For one weekend a year, Valco Village is turned into a small town in Germany. The Cupertino Rotary had their 3rd annual Oktoberfest last weekend. We were there to bring you the highlights.
This is the 3rd annual Cupertino Rotary Oktoberfest, so it's our 3rd year, and we anticipate many years to come. So it's growing every year. The enthusiasm, the authenticity of the program and everything is getting bigger and better.
And why do you do this?
Why do we do this? Well, Cupertino Rotary, is a service club here in the local community for a lot of service groups and charitable organizations. We give money to people that need assistance, children's programs, the elderly, senior citizens. We are involved with some of the speech programs in the high schools. We also have what we call the Interact clubs at Monte Vista High School and Cupertino High School, and soon to be Lynbrook High School.
Then all the proceeds go?
All the proceeds go to those particular service groups. I feel great because, first of all, it's sunny and beautiful, and a lot of people were talking about rain, and just the crowd. Our parking lots are full, and I feel great about it because I know all the effort of the individual Rotarians that has gone into putting this together, and to see this many people here is very, very gratifying.
I hope you all had a chance to drop by the Oktoberfest. It was a lot of fun. You may recall a few weeks ago we had discussion regarding housing for the handicapped in Cupertino. Now, after a 5-year struggle, community housing developers are finally seeing their dream come true. A groundbreaking ceremony last week marked the beginning of construction of the Cupertino Disabled Housing project. The 27-unit project, located on Bianchi Way, will cost an estimated $2 million and provide much-needed housing for the disabled in our community. CHD Board Director had this to say.
I'm proud to say that with determination, creativity, flexibility, legislative and community support, we finally realized our dream and the dreams of so many others who will benefit from this housing. We may not have solved all the housing problems facing the disadvantaged, but we can take satisfaction in knowing that our efforts here today have resulted in a unique complex that will stand as a model project for all communities to emulate. Thank you very much.
Cupertino Community Services Goblin Brigade will be out again this Halloween trick-or-treating for non-perishable food items to help the needy in the area. If your children are interested in participating, please call Cupertino Community Services at 255-8033 or drop off canned goods at their offices located behind the Union Church. Cans will also be collected at Parks and Recreation's Ghost Walk on October 30th and 31st at Jollyman Park between 6 and 9 p.m. Events will include a haunted house and carnival booths. For more information, call 253-2060. This month, Channel 30 will offer 2 special programs. First, on October 23rd at 7 p.m., we'll present Bicycling to Work, a 1-hour special in which experienced local cyclists will share their enthusiasm and information about proper maintenance, riding techniques, and safety tips. In addition, we'll tell you what the City of Cupertino is doing to aid the cyclist. And on October 25th at 7:30 p.m., a first of its kind, live cable casting of a town meeting. De Anza College, Channels 3 and 30 are sponsoring a town meeting offering local residents and experts the opportunity to share solutions to the problem of soaring health care costs. The meeting will take place in City Council Chamber and is free to the public. So come down to City Hall or watch the forum on this channel. Thanks for watching Cupertino Insight. Good night.